In Dongguan City, Guangdong Province, China, a group of young men and women reside under an underpass. They survive on basic meals, sprawled on the ground, some engaging in activities like live streaming on their phones or dancing spontaneously. In a video, auxiliary police can be seen inspecting the area and speaking to the group, but the youths completely ignore them. The streets of Shenzhen are filled with homeless youths. The Chinese Communist government often claims that the United States is riddled with homelessness while China is not. These young people starkly contradict the party's narrative. No one desires an uncomfortable life. If given a choice, who would willingly sleep on the streets or under bridges? In Guangzhou, a job fair scene shows a massive crowd looking for employment, yet no recruiters are present. The companies have essentially given up. This is the reality. The unemployment rate among young Chinese has approached 50%. Jobs are scarce, and while those with retired parents in their city can rely on them for support, rural youths without such support find themselves jobless and join the ranks of the homeless, barely surviving in corners of the city. For many, there is no home to return to. Here is a rural village in the northern mountains of Henan province, captured on camera by a migrant worker returning home. The desolation is heartbreaking, and it is truly a home one cannot return to. In cities that cannot retain them and homes they cannot return to, countless individuals struggle painfully under the pressure of survival. These rural elderly, still laboring physically, have no pensions or medical insurance. They must work every day to live. Sick and without money for treatment, they have no choice but to await death or take their own lives. The Chinese government often boasts about extending social securities to rural areas, claiming 170 million farmers now receive pensions. But how much do they actually receive each month? In 2020, the average monthly pension in rural China was less than $24. Urban pensions covered retirees from state-owned enterprises and public institutions, yet rural pensions are a fraction of those, sometimes amounting to nothing. Currently, the minimum standard pension for urban and rural residents in China is 123 yuan per month, and this is only for those who have paid into Social Security, who can live on 123 yuan. Therefore, the elderly who still can work have to take on the dirtiest, hardest, and most dangerous jobs to support their families. This gray-haired migrant worker squeezes into a narrow concrete pipe, a sight that's suffocating just to watch. Who would risk their life like this if they weren't forced by the need to survive? According to estimates, there are nearly 300 million migrant workers in China. Their average monthly wage ranges from $525 to $722, far below the national average. Due to the household registration system, they and their children often lack access to public services like healthcare and education, and most are not covered by the national pension or disability insurance plans. When these workers lose their factory jobs during economic downturns, they are not included in the official unemployment statistics. Thus, the actual number of unemployed and impoverished people in China is far higher than official figures suggest. The banned documentary, 30 Years of Labor, was written by Associate Professor Chu Fenxian of Anhui Normal University after distributing 2,500 questionnaires and interviewing 200 people. The report shows that 60.7% of migrant workers have to work until they can't work anymore. Some argue that if middle-aged people can work so hard, why don't the homeless youths find jobs, even as delivery workers? Hasn't there been broadcasted claims that delivery jobs can earn a lot? Let's take a look at the weekly pay of a delivery worker. It's really disgusting. We had a new guy at our station. He's been running deliveries for 7 days, and when I saw his paycheck today, it was just atrocious. Let me show you. He only worked 7 days because he started at the end of the month. He did 195 orders, averaging over 20 a day since he's a newbie. Then they deducted 34 yuan for insurance, 280 yuan for materials, stuff he had to buy when he joined, like a storage box, helmet, and uniform. I think those materials are quite expensive. They took 267 yuan for accommodations since he stays in our station's dorm. He doesn't have his own bike, so he uses the station's, and they deducted 594 yuan for the bike and battery rental. It's probably a monthly charge. Adding it all up, they deducted a total of 1,175 yuan. And his salary? it was only 1,263 yuan in total. So for his first 7 days, he actually took home only 97 yuan. That's just over a dozen yuan a day. He runs for at least 9 hours a day, earning just about 1 or 2 yuan per hour. With such earnings, can one afford to eat? A 28-year-old delivery worker, while delivering food, accidentally crashed into a roadside guardrail, bleeding profusely. Passers-by called for emergency assistance, and by the time the ambulance arrived, he had already begun to convulse unconsciously. The doctor lifted him into an ambulance and rushed to the nearest hospital. The delivery worker, barely conscious, was still worried about the undelivered order. He feared that his day's efforts would be wasted if he couldn't complete this delivery on time. The doctor had to contact the customer for him. Only after hearing that the customer wouldn't complain did the delivery worker finally fall into a deep sleep. At the hospital, the doctor suggested a comprehensive examination to check for internal bleeding. However, the delivery worker told the doctor, "I've just arrived in Hangzhou and don't have much money. There's no need." There are young people living under bridges and sleeping on the streets. Elderly people in rural areas in their 80s and 90s still working in the fields. And middle-aged migrant workers in cities risking their lives for money. Do they not desire a better life? It is poverty that restricts their options. According to the poverty line set for China by the World Bank, headquartered in Washington, D.C., over 40% of the population are categorized as living in extreme poverty, while 80% are considered poor. Data indicates that nationwide, over 800 million people are in debt, with 420 million at risk of default. Credit card delinquencies have exceeded 200 billion yuan. There are more than 8.61 million defaulters, a number that continues to rise. The total personal debt has reached 350 trillion yuan, averaging 140,000 yuan per person. In China today, with unemployment rates soaring, 85% of families earn less than 50,000 yuan a year. Many families don't even have 1,000 yuan in liquid assets, let alone savings. Data from the International Monetary Fund, based in Washington, D.C., shows that the GDP per capita in the U.S. is $85,300, while China's is only $13,100, ranking 74th globally, below countries like Mexico, Kazakhstan, and Malaysia. The Chinese government claims that only 0.04% of the population lives below the poverty line. However, the poverty line used by the Chinese government is much lower compared to the international standards. Based on 2010 prices, the official poverty line in China is an annual income of 2,300 yuan, about $340, which is well below the World Bank's international poverty line of $1.90 per day. In fact, in 2021, 47% of the population in China lived on $10 or less per day. If using the U.S. poverty line from 1960, which is $21.7 per day, 80 to 90% of the population in China today would be considered poor. Moreover, the income disparity between urban and rural areas in China is substantial, with rural residents earning 80% more than the rural counterparts. Averaging incomes mask the vast number of people in dire poverty in rural areas. Previously, whenever poverty was mentioned, people would think of remote mountain areas. 3 years ago, the Chinese government blatantly announced that all poor populations had been lifted out of poverty. In other words, from then on, China no longer had any poor people. In 2021, CCP leader Xi Jinping declared that all 99 million rural poor people in China had been lifted out of poverty. 832 poverty-stricken counties removed their poverty labels. 128,000 poor villages were delisted. 3 years have passed. Now let's follow the lens of Chinese netizens in 2024 to see the real situation of poverty alleviation in mountainous areas. In the Danliang Mountains of Sichuan, one of China's poorest regions, a man working in public welfare shares, "You wouldn't believe it unless you saw it with your own eyes. It's hard to believe there are still people living in such poverty. The scenes before me are heart-wrenching. The children here live in extreme poverty. They lack adequate clothing and food, and access to quality education is non-existent." The social media user notes, despite their poverty, they too have dreams and hopes for the future. In China, who hasn't had dreams in their youth? Yet the solidification of social classes has already determined that these children have no future. Like most Chinese, they are condemned to be sacrifices of the regime. Some say, but aren't there a great many golden phoenixes that have flown out of the mountain valleys? Haven't many of them become China's middle class? It's true, during the reform and opening up years, foreign companies and internet businesses rapidly developed, enabling many educated and capable individuals to accumulate wealth through high salaries and incomes. This facilitated their entry into the middle class, including those from impoverished backgrounds. But are these people still doing well now? In recent years, due to China's real estate market, stock market, and other exploitive schemes, these people's assets have long been diluted to nothing. They are burdened with massive debts, becoming the most tragically impoverished group. Despite the CCP's deliberate choice of a lower poverty line to claim significant reductions in poverty, the reality is that even by the party's own standards, over 80% of the population had long been impoverished. There's a saying that has become popular now: the wealthy die by trust, the middle class by leverage, and the poor by P2P lending. You might believe your assets are secure, but Big Brother has been watching you for a long time. They always find a way to turn your money into theirs. To them, you're merely a resource to be exploited. Investors say the A-share market is China's biggest casino. Homeowners lament that being tricked into mortgages to buy homes is the biggest scam. In China, there are 200 million stock investors, passing down the stock market baton for over 30 years, often losing everything. With 400 million mortgage slaves, in just a few years, they find themselves trapped in the abyss of housing loans. If you believe stock investors lack skill because of their financial performance, consider BlackRock, a prominent global fund management firm known for its top traders. While they often achieve annual returns of 50% in the US stock market, their experience in China's A-share market has been less successful, leading to their abrupt dismissal of their China region head. Before departing, the executive famously remarked on the A-share market, "You can't buy enough. You think you're purchasing stocks, but what's actually being sold is the company." When companies in China go public, it's not for growing, but instead for cashing out, selling off the company. That is to say, the A-share market is not an investment market, but a financing market for the Chinese government, where investors' money is used to solve various problems. According to statistics, over the past 8 years, the CCP has extracted 20 trillion yuan from the stock market through various taxes and fees. This includes 1.5 trillion from the stamp duty, 1.8 trillion from brokerage fees, 2.8 trillion from new stock issues, 3.3 trillion from major shareholders reducing their stakes, and 9.7 trillion from refinancing by listed companies. Convertible bond issues over the same period took in another 1.3 trillion yuan. In terms of dividends, the total amount distributed over the past 8 years was 13.4 trillion yuan, but bear in mind that a 20% tax also had to be paid. Therefore, the money that investors could actually reclaim from these dividends amounted to only 10.8 trillion yuan. This means that investors have lost almost 50% over 8 years. In 2023 alone, it is documented that the CCP plundered nearly 3 trillion yuan from the A-share market, with state-owned listed companies cashing out as much as 1.3 trillion yuan. By the time the unfortunate investors realize what has happened, their invested money has already evaporated. This is a harsh reality behind the phenomenon of permanently stuck at 3,000 points in China's stock market. Entering 2024, with the CCP's finances increasingly strained, the pace of plundering the stock market has visibly accelerated. Just on June 24th, the Chinese stock market experienced another disaster with widespread losses. Over 5,000 stocks fell into the two markets. Only 327 stocks rose. Not only that, according to the editor-in-chief of Global Times, Hu Xijin, this morning he tried logging into his brokerage app to trade and it was incredibly slow. It was hard to even log in, which greatly affected his ability to operate. But previously, Hu had said, "Once I buy, I never sell. So why try to log in? Are you planning to run? Our broker straight up tells you, you want to run? I'll just pull your internet connection. You want to log in? Want to sell? I won't even let you log into your account." It's gotten to this point now. As you can see, Hu Xijin is one of their own and holds considerable influence. The CCP disregards this as anyone daring to enter the A-share market, whether grassroots investors, middle-level investors, or foreigners, is subject to being exploited. Attempting to run is virtually impossible.
跌成这个样子。
Anyone with a shred of conscience wouldn't allow the stock market to collapse like this, much less let millions of investors suffer like victims of a disaster. Stop with the fancy speeches on stage. End the charade. There's no audience left. Can't even admit it's a fall anymore. Must we say waiting to rise? When can we stop deceiving ourselves? They'll scrape the bottom of the barrel. One investor reported a direct loss of 59,600 yuan on June 24th alone. In the 5 days of the previous week, he lost a total of 106,000 yuan, and by June, his losses had accumulated to 204,000 yuan. His total losses for the first half of the year were close to 300,000 yuan. Adding to last year's losses, over the course of a year and a half, he has lost a total of 505,100 yuan, which is the price of a BMW X5. Currently, the CCP's regulatory bodies claim they are protecting the interests of investors by forcing unqualified stocks to delist. However, unlike international practices, the CCP's delisting process involves no compensation for investors, directly resulting in hundreds of thousands of them losing their entire investment. If speculating in stocks is considered a self-inflicted misfortune, what about the middle class deeply trapped in mortgages?
I spend 5,000 yuan a month on my mortgage. As a salaried worker, I only make a bit over 4,000 yuan a month, and I have a child to support.
I'm 35 this year, with a mortgage of 3.5 million yuan. I impulsively took out a loan to buy a house in 2019, and my monthly payment is about 18,000 yuan, of which 16,000 is just interest. I've been paying for over 3 years now, but I really can't keep up anymore. According to the current payment plan, I'll be paying until I'm 65. Although I've had the house for a year, I don't even have money for renovations, so I can't move in. I've paid off over 1 million yuan in 7 years, but I still owe 1.7 million. I honestly don't know what to do now. I really want to sell the house, but I can't.
My house has been foreclosed, and it's been sealed now. In 2019, I bought a 3-bedroom, 110 square meter apartment in Dongguan for over 2 million yuan. The down payment was 600,000 yuan, and the loan was over 1.4 million yuan, with monthly payments of over 8,000 yuan. Funny thing is, my previous loan interest rate was 5.8%. Last April, I lost my income, which forced me to default. At that time, I discovered I still owed over 1.3 million yuan. Over 3 years, I had paid over 300,000 yuan, of which over 200,000 was interest. 6 months after defaulting, I was sued by the bank, and the court ruling came through. Not only did they seal my house, but they also froze my bank accounts and even my WeChat wallet. Plus, I had to pay penalties, lawyer fees, litigation costs, property preservation fees, totaling nearly 100,000 yuan. A few days ago, the court informed me that my house was about to be auctioned off at a 30% discount, equivalent to over 1.4 million yuan. The market's so bad, no one dares to buy. If it gets auctioned off, I'll have nowhere to even sit and cry. The house is gone, the down payment is gone, and I still owe the bank tens of thousands of yuan. With the 300,000 yuan I paid previously, plus the down payment, the total loss is up to 800,000 or 900,000 yuan.
Paying 4,000 yuan every month is too much pressure. My child still needs to go to school, and my job isn't stable. I work 2 jobs a day, getting up at 5 a.m. and going to bed past 10 p.m., not knowing when this will end. I want to sell the house, but can't. Even if I could sell it, I'd still owe money. The down payment is gone, and I'd have to pay even more money into it.
What kind of life is this for someone with a mortgage? I feel like my monthly salary of 7,000 or 8,000 yuan isn't bad in Qingdao, but I have to spend half of it on the mortgage. With just over 3,000 yuan left, it covers all expenses: food, transportation, phone bills, toiletries, and makeup. Even when ordering takeout, I have to see which option is cheaper. I've stopped eating dinner. Every day is about pinching pennies. When I pass a clothing store and see a dress I like, I don't even have the courage to try it on. I have to save wherever I can.
Home ownership has drained the finances of most Chinese families and dashed the future aspirations of those born in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. This grim reality has awakened younger generations born in the 1990s and 2000s to a stark truth. If tying marriage, parenthood, and future prospects to owning a home is the price, many would prefer to forego marriage, children, and home ownership altogether. Consequently, both the marriage rate and birth rate have reached new lows. The decision by young people not to have children brings about a new problem. Fewer working-age individuals will have to support an increasing number of pensioners. The only solution is to raise Social Security contributions and taxes, which further reduces the income of young people and increases the burden on businesses. Many young people are lamenting, "My parents are farming alone in the countryside, while I'm working desperately in the city to support someone else's parents. I can't support my parents now, and won't be able to support myself later. Why should I pay into Social Security?" Thus, many have started abandoning their jobs. Those young people living under bridges might not even be able to ensure basic necessities, but they seem much happier than the homeowners and stock investors. At least they do not have to endure hunger while also fearing debt collectors at their doors, or live out their days with the guilt of having squandered their elderly parents' savings. In fact, China's actual poverty rate is clearly rising, with the original impoverished population not improving and a sharp increase in new cases of poverty. As political and economic conditions continue to deteriorate, China could very well face a new era of widespread impoverishment.